Chapter 6, But This Will Cost Me. Discovering What I Value. Our culture is very concerned about cost. How much does it cost? Can I get it cheaper? Can I get it on payments? And is there a coupon? Cost is everything. Our money-focused world saturates us from an early age about the cost of things. It's a good thing because we do want to be stewards of what God has given us. It's a necessary thing. We need to not spend more than we make. It's a spiritual thing. We need to be efficient with the things of God, thus allowing us to bless more people with our resources. However, sometimes cost gets caught in the worth. If it costs much, it's not worth it. If it doesn't cost enough, it's not valuable. Our life and how we determine to love and serve others will cost us. How do we walk through life and not be controlled by what we value? After all, value is a good thing. Jesus taught us to value things that are important in the kingdom, and yet the things we have, hold, and care for, sometimes that cost is letting go. So to serve and love others, we must determine what's important. Sometimes we let go of things we value to find a greater worth in loving and serving. Being part of a community will cost. Often people look at the commitment of time, energy, and relationships and decide it's just too much to pay. Relationships take time and energy. Serving others takes resources, and what we pick up for someone else, we often must put down for ourselves. The things we value must be equated to be of spiritual and relationship value, not just a physical or monetary asset. Now, I really do worry about score sheets. I love playing games. I torment my friends and husband to play a game I learned on the way to Africa, 5 crowns. The game is fun. The score sheets are cruel. Why do we keep score? Because we want to know who wins. Kids learn that at an early age with Uno, chicken scratch, and dominoes. It's a fun game until you start adding up the score. And then often it determines if we're having fun, if winning. All determines by the score. So when do we just play to enjoy the moment and score? Well, that's irrelevant. It's really hard to do because one of our human tendencies is we have to be a winner. We cannot lose a game and still be a winner. That just doesn't make sense. If we lose, we consider ourselves a loser. If someone needs something, it's about how much does it cost? Simply loving and serving is hard to do when the tally sheet's on the wall and we just keep going back to us. Our families get the best of us. For our kids, we'll give up comfort time and drive across the country in the middle of the night to make sure the little one who forgot her bunny had it for her first sleepover. Our friends, well, they get some of us. It all depends on the length of history and the depth of relationship. It's kind of like a well. Some wells are deep and some are shallow. We want to make sure that we have friends with deep wells, so we always have what we need. Cost isn't an issue because friends do the give and take. Now, I've heard it said that takers eat better and givers sleep better. Think about that. Takers eat better and givers sleep better. There could be some truth to that. When we consider giving, doing, and serving or loving, and the first thing we think about is what it'll cost us, we have the cart in front of the horse. No one is going to go for a ride anywhere, and the horse will probably run away. Consider the cost of giving and loving based on what it will cost God. Well, follow me here now. God gave us all we have. Therefore, nothing I have is mine anyway. So if someone has a need, will it cost me anything? Not really, because all I have is God's. My hands are clenched very tightly on God's things that I think are mine. Does that mean we don't value the cost? No, we understand the value and the cost. It's just that it's not our problem. It's God's problem. What is God's angle on cost or profit and loss balance sheets? That's kind of what we're talking about. Now, when a business looks at their financial records, they're making sure their profit-loss column indicates a growth in their company. Too much in the loss column and they suffer. Higher numbers in the profit part and everybody gets a bonus. Well, Acts 2:35 said it's more blessed to give than receive, and it's a very well-quoted verse, but what was Paul really talking about? This part of Acts 20, he's talking to people about how he has chosen to live. He's not tried to be a burden on others. He has desired not what others have, and he's tried to be an example to minister to those he's touching shoulders with. Paul wanted them to see what ministering to others looked like. He wanted them to grasp what it meant by reaching to love on people. And as he was explaining what serving, loving was all about, he reminded them about Jesus' mission and goal on earth, which was to give. He was saying goodbye, a long Minnesota goodbye, and trying to give them as much parting advice as possible. Okay, now, Minnesota goodbyes. If you've never lived here, you may not relate to anything, so I'm going to explain. When people, especially one neighbor up the road, would come to visit, it would take 30 minutes to say goodbye. You stood in the kitchen, then you moved to the foyer, then you stood with your hand on the doorknob before you moved outside. Now in the summer it would take another 30 minutes, but the winter, once you opened the door and stepped out into Minnesota winter, you went home. One day the neighbor came over. He came in, and of course my mother said, "Are you hungry?" To which his reply was, "No, just had dinner." Well, then my mother put a plate on the table and filled it, and he ate, talked, finished, said he had to get home, stood up, stood in the kitchen, backed his way into the foyer, and eventually got to the door holding the doorknob. About 10 minutes later, the phone rang. It was his wife. Her only comment to whoever picked the phone up was, "Tell Frosty," that's what we called him, "to get his hand off the doorknob and come home." That's what Paul was doing in this part of the chapter. He kept coming up with things to say, but it was all about what it would cost to love people. It's more blessed to give than receive. Even though we know it's true, there's a part of our heart that gets snagged if we give away something. We kind of think we've lost it. And it's not true. We've just simply changed its place of residence. Now, I haven't lost the things that I love blessing people with. I've gifted them love. Yet we hold on to things we really don't need because we're good stewards. Yes and no. If we look at all we have as a loan from God, then letting it reside in someone else's care who needs it more than we do or can use it more than the use it's getting sitting in our storage lockers, we need to let it go. It will cost us, but since nothing is ours, it doesn't really cost us. The cost is prying our fingers off and letting go. Now, there are times when I forget that I probably should have asked Jim before I gave the things God gave us to someone else. He isn't surprised anymore. We've had several cars that lived long past their time with us because somebody else needed a car. What a neat blessing it is to hand over the keys and say, "Drive it till you don't need it anymore." Jim would make sure the oil got changed, and if they needed something, they'd holler. But the Green Frog was driven by lots of kids, adults, and people who needed a car. Now, mind you, it was an ugly green Escort and practically no power, but it went down the road legally, and it could exceed the speed limit going downhill. Eventually, it was given to a man who needed a car, and I used to see it going around our local town and smile. More of the surprise it was still going, but we were really thankful it had a purpose. Value and cost combined to bring purpose to a priceless experience. And Matthew talks about value. It seems that we value things that we worry about. And he mentions food, clothes, and our worth, and then hints at our traditions. We place value on things that make us feel good and that make us feel secure. Somehow our looks, our wealth, and our comfort weave their way into what we value. Well, that's not all bad, but if that's our focus, we miss out on what Jesus was saying in verse 33. We want all things, but sometimes the value we place on them overindulges in worrying that we will keep them, possess them, and be known by them. So what are my values? Does believing in something cost me? Well, let's look into Matthew 6 and see what Jesus really says. Matthew 6:25 begins with, "Therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food and body more than clothing?" Okay, let's just say amen and go home. Our values are what we think about and sadly what we worry about. The things that God emphasizes are needs but quickly can turn into possessiveness. We need to eat. We need to wear something, and we need to take care of what we have. But often we are consumed with what we will eat, what we will wear, and what we have. Our value, our worth becomes things that we put attention on. Therefore, we fret and worry about losing those things. Serving, loving, and doing may pry our hands off what we have, and then we will lose it. Okay, remember, it's not ours anyway. But we grip it tighter and put more in the closet and rent another storage locker. We have plenty to eat, yet we hoard. We have clothes to wear, yet we go shopping. We know our worth is in our value as a child of God, and yet we must go get something that makes us feel special. We are valuing the wrong things. We can't improve our status. We can't stash more food. We can't have more clothes than our closet will hold to cover up the insecurity in our heart. When we change what we value, the grip loosens, the shoulders lift, and we begin looking for people to love, not looking for those who may take away from us. Verse 33 I alluded to earlier is the focus Jesus really wants us to have. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. What things? Well, it's the things that we have leashes controlling, bags covering, and storage lockers hiding. What Jesus is getting at is to look around and value people, not stuff. When we begin being Jesus, with no place to lay his head, and love people, our values become higher than our earthly needs, and somehow our needs get supplied in ways we can't understand. I've discovered in my looking at ways God has gotten my attention, I noticed something. God helped me lose my grip on things I thought I owned. Yet watching someone else enjoy it led me to a deeper faith walk. Being drawn closer to God was worth loosening the grip. It's more blessed to give than receive. Now, there's something special about giving, but it's also mixed with the tenderness of receiving. Somewhere in our human nature, there's a file that says, I give, but I don't receive. It's there in your brain because it's in mine, and I know I'm not the only one. We love to give. We love the feeling that giving in our heart presents. Once we've stepped over the logs of our stuff and started releasing it as God intended, we fall in love with giving. And then someone has the audacity to try to give to us. We argue and we blow them off and we find excuses and we hurt their feelings. Why is it so hard to receive? I don't remember the details, but somewhere along the line of my loving to give, someone tried to give to me. You will notice I said tried. I told them no thanks, I didn't need, I don't think I said I probably didn't want. But I made it quite plain that I was the giver, not the receiver. Unfortunately, or fortunately, God put their spirit in tenacity, and they looked at me in the eye and said, you know that incredible feeling you get when you bless people? Well, you are refusing to be blessed is stealing from me that wonderful gift of blessing you. You are stealing from me that feeling and the reward of being a blesser. Ouch. They were right. I love to give, but to deny someone else was stealing their blessing of being a blessing. It's important to let go of things we value so we can bless others, and it's also important to let go of the things we value so they don't become entwined so much in our heart that we forget who owns them. It's important to let go of things we value to remind us we're not living here, and all we hold dear are things that will be eternal. And they're simply not things. They're people. Things own us. We don't own things. The more things we have, the more things we have to take care. By letting go of the things that God has given us temporary ownership of, we allow others to be blessed, and in return, with the very things we previously held tightly in our clenched fists. It's important to let go of things we value so we remember who we are, not what we have. It'll cost us, but since everything we own is God's, really it's just costing God. Let him have back control of his stuff and bless others until you have nothing left. And when that happens, you're going to look around and see how much of your stuff, what it did in the arms of those that God really had intended it for. The 3 values I found coming back around was meeting people's needs, maintaining relationships, and finding God in the cracks. When I sat down and thought about the past few years, there's a few things that jumped out at my heart. I was somewhere in the East. I said that because I don't remember details, but I do remember the rain. I was spending time at Hillsborough Family Camp, me and my tent. They had one of those monsoon-like weeks, and by Friday night, everything was wet. The family I was camping at were pastors from somewhere in northern Ohio. We visited and we ate a lot of meals together in the rain. I was to sing that weekend somewhere, and it got canceled, so I had the week off. The family I'd gotten to know as we bailed water out of everything we owned invited me to come to church with them on Sunday. Because I had time on my hands, I phoned a friend. Yeah, I do have friends. And she said, well, come on down and stay with them. So from camp, I went to my brother's and dried out my tent. And then early Sunday, I left his house and traveled to church at this pastor's church. Well, I have never been at a church like this one. Maybe I don't go to enough churches, but I came in the back and sat in the back so nobody would see me. Well, the pastor got up at the end of the service. There was something special, so he didn't preach that day, but he told the family that he'd been at family camp and got flooded out, and they met someone beside me, and then he called out, is that you, Mert? That's what they called me. Well, I couldn't hide anymore, so I kind of waved. Well, when the benediction was over, I had several people come up and say hi, and then, of course, the pastor too. But then what happened really blew my mind. The pastor apologized because they were heading for a youth camp, so he couldn't take me out to lunch, and he handed me some money. Someone else came and gave me some more money because they couldn't take me out to lunch, and then an elder came by and did the same. Wow! That would not be the only way God showed up that week. I headed south to Pennsylvania with cash in my pocket. Now, I said God was showing up, but what I didn't know was my friend's husband, a pastor, had passed out that morning before church, and they rushed him to the hospital. The church was asking what they could do, and my friend said, well, it just so happens that Marit is coming to stay with us so she can handle the boys when I'm at the hospital. That's exactly what I did. I drove the miles, got to her house. We'd visit in the morning and laugh, and she'd head for the hospital, and I oversaw the baby and Jonathan. The baby was about 6 months, and I think Jonathan was about 6. Most of the time, we dropped the baby off at a neighbor's house who loved babies, and I occupied Jonathan's time. We had a blast, and our friendship deepened. I just so happened to have the time off. She just so happened to had a husband in the hospital. The irony of that happening is impossible. It's God reminding me of what I valued. I valued relationships and meeting needs, and it just so happened that both our needs were met. For most of our life, we do the right thing at the right time because it's what the right thing to do. It's not necessarily what we want to do, but it's the opportunity to do what you're expected to do. God uses much of those circumstances to just talk to us. It's the unexpected providence of God, like Job might have felt as he felt the blessings of God after walking through his valley. I love my cabin, our cabin. It's a little bit of heaven and earth, and it's where I go to reboot. Well, one of our relatives, Aunt Shirley, had fallen and hit her head and was very ill in the hospital, and it was kind of a waiting game, and we tried having people be with her even though she wasn't aware because family was walking her home. The week wore on and Shirley held on, and there was family making sure she was never alone, but there was a graduation of great nephews, and remember how much I love hospitals? Well, it was my idea of a bed and breakfast, but when the right thing was presented, I told others loving on Shirley that if no one could be with her Friday night, I would come and stay. We were all hoping that God would take her, but there she lay quietly, seemingly unaware that we were loving her, but ready to let her go. The Lake Association meeting was on Saturday, so I drove north to enjoy the lake and be there for the meeting. I was the financial board member, so I had to have the report all ready to go and figured I could get in some fishing. Later that morning, I got the text. No one else had offered. They would take me up on my willingness to spend Friday night with Shirley so they could get a good night's sleep before traveling to celebrate the graduation with the other family. Sometimes, even in the oddest times, it's the right thing to do, to celebrate milestones. And that's exactly what Shirley would have wanted. Well, I quickly packed my bag and put the treasurer's report in the door and sent a note for someone to stop and pick it up, and I drove back home, the 3-hour drive home. This time I didn't seem to dread the thought of staying in a hospice unit in the hospital, and it was different because my heart wanted to be where my body didn't. It was a special night, and when it was all over, I sat and wrote about my night and morning with Shirley. Had I not been willing to follow God's leading and my desire to love on Shirley, I would have missed one of the neatest moments. I wrote about that experience and read it at her celebration. There's a saying, we're all just walking each other home, that tends to make us realize several things. First, we are more than simply me. It's a group effort. Walking means there's something required of me, or we, that requires effort and movement. The last is that here is not home. Home is somewhere else. For the believer, and Shirley was a believer, that home was heaven. The past 2 weeks have been walking, living quilt woven by the family of Shirley. Some were thread, some were fabric, some were binding, some were color, and some were contrast backing. The family had all come together to walk Shirley home. I got to be a special part of that walk. Friday night, I came to spend the night with Aunt Shirley. When the nurses were done getting Shirley comfortable for the night, I put iHeartRadio on the Gaither station and just sat with her and listened. I wrote in my journal for a while and then held her hand before telling her goodnight and turned off the music and the lights. Occasionally, I would hear the nurses come in and check on her, and I kept an ear open for the shallow breaths. God woke me abruptly at 7 a.m. I told Shirley good morning and sent a note to the family saying we had a quiet night and visited with the nurse during their shift change. I turned back on the Gaither music. Because He Lives, and then a song I hadn't heard for a while, I Just Came to Talk with You, Lord. It was during that song as I sat by the bed I missed it, the breath. I stood up and said, Shirley, are you leaving us? As I stroked her hand. I watched as without effort God simply took her home. It's a feeling that goes beyond any description. I called the nurse and we stood together with awe and sadness, and yet a feeling of fulfillment saturated every part of my heart. As I showed the nurse the next song as it began to play, it was, We Shall Wear a Robe and a Crown. We said, wow. 14 minutes had passed since I felt God wake me. God handles details very well. This life is full of uncertainties. Rewind 3 weeks ago. Shirley was visiting, loving, serving, preparing for VBS coming this week. This life is full of uncertainties, and yet one of the last songs Shirley heard gives us reason to believe that during these uncertainties we have hope. Not only we have hope, but we have purpose. Not only a purpose, but a reason to believe that as bad as our day-to-day may be, we can face tomorrow because we have a future. The God who created the world we're spinning on is the God who holds our life gently in His hand. Perhaps it's not the future we may have envisioned, but as Shirley learned, it's not about this world, but about the faith we have in the one who holds the future. So discovering what I value has changed the way I approach loving, serving, and giving. My value system is simply meeting needs, establishing relationships, and seeking the kingdom. When we align our values with God's heart, we find we're led by the shepherd. Do we understand? Not always, and sometimes not at all. Does it matter that we know? No. What matters is that we know that God will walk with us when our values are more important than our wants. What matters is that God will fill the gap when the words get caught in our throat and our eyes fill with tears. What matters is that we hold the hands of the ones that are placed within our reach. What matters is that God is honored, and we remember love is stronger than fear, and the right thing to do is always the right thing to do.